they never felt like hip hop was being sort of impressed onto them, but they were able to observe and feel like they understood what was happening in the game and what was happening with like the content of the cards and all the events that sort of take place in hip hop, and they felt connected to it and they wanted to keep playing.
You're listening to Honey and Hustle, a video podcast that inspires the dreamers, creators, and hustlers to make a business from their passions. I'm Angela Hollowell, and I'm a visual storyteller based in Durham, North Carolina. I sit down with creative entrepreneurs, nonprofit founders, and small business owners as they share their stories, the lessons they've learned throughout their careers, and how they've worked to make a positive impact.
Hey everyone, today I'm here with Omari, who is the incredible designer down the street here in Durham, North Carolina. He has designed everything from tabletop games to other incredible digital designs that you'll probably see on your screen at some point here in the near future as we talk about how you can find him. But for now, I just want to get started with the basics of thanking him for being here with me today. Hey Omari, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for the intro.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to get into a little bit about what's behind you, but just for frame of reference for people who are listening and watching, and just being able to view all these incredible, beautiful visual things in his background. I first came across Omari and his work when he launched a hip hop inspired tabletop game called Godz. And I thought that was so unique and such a different way to highlight Black culture because that's not something I would ever think of, right? Like, when you think of um, uh, Black culturally inspired game, you probably think of like NBA 2K or, any NFL game you could play on PlayStation or Xbox. So not necessarily a tabletop game that you can play with friends in person and just kind of have fun with, and that can be accessible for all people. So I really want to get into why you as a designer decided to make a tabletop game and how your creativity kind of led you down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I like solving problems. And one day, me and my brother were just kind of talking about board games. I had been playing a lot of games. This was when the hobby was really growing in like, 2010, 2011. And I got into it and enjoyed it and just thought, wow, this is really cool and really fun. But my brother presented me with the problem of where are all the Black experiences and Black culture related games. And so we had the bright idea to just start making them because we couldn't find them, and at least in the format that we wanted. We wanted something unique, something that encompassed a lot of the things that we care about in a game, and had some interesting and different gameplay. That because that's what I saw in the board game industry at the time was like, wow, they're creating so many new and fun like interactions in board games now. Can we do that and just extend it out into Black culture?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think that that element of like, how can we not only just create something that's for us, but still innovate within that space, right? I think sometimes solving our own problems at first seems like innovation and the basis for a good idea. But if you're not setting it up to think about like, not only am I solving a problem, but I'm improving upon and really contributing to this industry as I'm creating in it, then like how am I going to set the foundation for myself to progress and be taken seriously? um and so like as you guys like started to create this and we're like going down the process, like what were some of the first things you did? Because if I were to say like I want to start or I want to create a tabletop game that is inspired by Black filmmakers, I wouldn't have the first idea of how to start doing something like that.
Yeah, I was lucky because in the small tabletop community that I was part of here in the Triangle, there was a designer who was kind of just starting out in the process too. So I had a little bit of a model. Yeah, his name is Brian. He lives in Raleigh. He has still making games, so which is cool. So kind of the person who got me my leg up. Yeah, it was kind of just following his lead and seeing what was possible. So those first few things really were, okay, what is it? What does the process actually look like? And so he was able to give me that breakdown. And now it's cool. Like you can go online, there are resources available for tabletop gamer designers specifically to like learn some of these things and find out what the process is. But he really showed me that. And the next thing almost immediately was just like make the game like in the smallest, easiest format that you can and get it on in front of some people and play it. So just understanding, broadly what the process looked like and then jumping in headfirst was really the best way to go about it. I think, yeah, there's a tendency to kind of hesitate and try and figure out and solve the problem of what the game is before you start. But really thinking about tabletop game design, like it's physical and all of those interactions and everything you see on the table, it really needs to be physical for you to get the complete picture of what it is. So it was all about, yeah, just getting something to the table. And my brother really took the lead on that and made us an entire prototype in a weekend, I think, so we could actually try it out. And it just snowballed from there.
Nice, nice. I think you said something that a lot of people can relate to, which is that sometimes when we have an idea, we try to figure out what the endpoint is going to be before we actually just even try to make the idea a reality, right? So sometimes just in making things, you figure out like what the kinks are, what can be improved, and just like what are some barriers to creating something like this. And maybe that's why it hasn't been created, and how are you going to overcome that? So I think like jumping in is such a great way to start validating an idea. The second part of what you said was not only create it, but like get it in the hands of people, like let people experience it before trying to make it also perfect. And so after your brother made the prototype, how did you guys get it in front of other gamers who could be your potential customers?
Yeah, so this was also pretty lucky. Knowing somebody who was in the industry, they were traveling to board game conventions, and I just say that to most people, and they're like, "Wow, I didn't even know that was a thing." And it's real, but there's organizations at this point now, even they were smaller back then, but they're pretty big now. They are built for new designers to prototype and play test games. There's one that I work with occasionally called Unpub, and they host events and they will kind of give you the infrastructure and ideas for how to host your own playtesting events. Because they know they've been doing it for a while. And yeah, organizations like that, they have it specifically, they run events at conventions. So I was able to get connected to one of those, actually at PAX Unplugged in Philly. And that was the first convention where I really got to play test my game. Like people that I didn't know had never seen me before, um, you know, taking that risk and trying something new. And it was a hip hop game. So everybody who looked at it and came over and saw it was like, wow, this is really different. This isn't something that I've seen before. Which told us, we were in the right place. But we got amazing feedback that weekend and really like I think changed the trajectory of the game completely.
Nice, nice. I think I know, I feel, I desire for it to be true that, when you have such a niche idea within a space that is still currently being validated by customers. So, like in this case, when you have such a different take on a product that people may be familiar with in concept, but there may not be as many people attending these type of conferences, and there may not be as much feedback to gain. I think that's still valuable because it represents like quality over quantity in terms of like your user base and your market fit. And when trying to like get things out there, again, going back to like, when you just have an idea and you're all excited and you're just like, I want it to
Hmm.
be XYZ as soon as I launch it. I want, this, my audience to be this big. I want, all these other things that may not really matter at the end of the day. If you have a big audience and they're not engaging with your stuff, or they're not the right audience that's going to engage with the new product that you put out. So I think some of it too is like not being afraid to get that more direct, smaller feedback, but from an engaged like audience who really cares about the integrity of the product. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
So
mean that you describing kind of like one of our biggest challenges, which is like, how do we, as like we're sort of carving out this very different new space, how in that do we make sure we're talking to the right people who are going to appreciate, what we're doing? And like the convention that I mentioned in Philly, majority of our playtesters there were white gamers, right? Because like that was the industry back then, at least when we started, for sure. And we knew that we were making this game also for the Black community. So like we had to take the game to our friends' houses or to like family gatherings and get our people to play too, and get that feedback from both sides, and then try to make sense of it in a way that still feels like this is going to be a product that both types of people or wherever you come from can enjoy, and with no real proof of concept for that. It was a really 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 big challenge, and we're facing the same thing again with Hoop Guys, just understanding that there's a particular place that basketball and basketball culture and hip hop like intersect, but how do we translate that into, hey, sit down and play this semi-complex game that kind of has the same vibe as the street basketball, culture that we're familiar with.
no, yeah, I think again, like just going back to not even going back, but starting from that place and going forward as we think about like, there are people who are like, I made this for Black people. I made this for people who like to bike. I made this for people who like to play basketball, right? Like I made this for this specific group of people, but like how do I like not make that group of people so narrow that so few people would be our potential customers? Like, and how do I make it
Yeah.
welcoming for people who may not even be as familiar with basketball culture, hip hop culture, interested in trying something like this that may not be the typical type of board game that they play, but it has enough of a story and concept that they're familiar with and open to trying something new. All right. So just like that storytelling aspect of like, how do I present something in a way that I
Hmm.
don't know if palatable is the right word, but just like intriguing at the very least to multiple groups of people.
Yeah, intriguing. I would say in some ways, inspiring, and in some ways educational. Like that was the like we knew that hip hop was a good starting point because it's one of the most popular music types in the world. Like it exists in such a vast space, and so we know people are aware of it. So like we've crossed that bridge, right? Like people understand what hip hop is. But when you actually sit down to play, it was like, okay, this is our opportunity now. What are we trying to do with the game, and what are we trying to say? And for those people who are not like ingrained in hip hop culture, we do want it to be like very understandable, the language that we use. So like, of course there's slang in the game, but we also try to make it understandable for somebody who is just entering into the space or just doesn't have all the context and nuance that we do. And so we have to translate a lot of that into the art, to try to really kind of sell the idea of each piece of content in the game as a real hip hop thing. And I recently actually got to sit in on a class at Duke where they played the game and they talked about it after. And that was a lot of the feedback was kind of in that vein. Like it never, they never felt like hip hop was being sort of impressed onto them, but they were able to observe and feel like they understood what was happening in the game and what was happening with like the content of the cards and all the events that sort of take place in hip hop, and they felt connected to it and they wanted to keep playing. So I think especially for rap gods, it is really in a really sweet spot. So yeah, we're just trying to get some more games printed and get these to as many people as possible.
Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned multiple times during that last little piece was language, right? So not only the language in the game, but language that is accessible and that would be understandable across multiple groups of people. I think for somebody like me who's not a designer, that is probably one of the biggest hurdles for me in getting better at design at first. And I'm just talking about like digital design, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like just like creating graphics better than, something off Canva or something like that. You know what I mean? Like just
Yeah,
learning
yeah.
kerning and all these other things that I had no concept of. And I think as you kind of reiterated, like the design field has gotten more and more accessible over the years as more people have been interested and more platforms have been popping up here and there to make it easier to get into. I think photography and filmmaking, most people know that
Mhm.
those type of fields are going to be the most expensive, right? They're very expensive hobbies just from the gear alone. And then writing is probably going to be the most other accessible because it's just pen and paper. That's pretty cheap.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to write digital notes on your phone, that's also accessible. Just about everybody has a phone nowadays. And design has kind of sat somewhere in the middle because of the software, right? So like if you're
Mhm.
thinking about like what free softwares are available, what actual like industry standard softwares are available, like that gap in payment is pretty stark for somebody just starting out.
Yeah.
So yeah, so or at least to me, I don't know. It sounds like you agree.
Yeah, it's getting more accessible by the day, and that's been kind of watching the board game industry grow. You can see all of the things that kind of contributed to that, from like things like 3D printing becoming way more accessible and inexpensive, to Kickstarter and more crowdfunding places being available. And really, I think the general understanding that games are here to stay, and especially tabletop games, like people responded well to those during the pandemic, and I think realized that they have a cultural importance, and so there's going to be a need to create more things. And yeah, I think just as long as people are aware of that and they're willing to take a little bit of a risk, because it's still not a huge money making industry, then yeah, it's a great place to start. And it's a lot easier to get into than it was now. But of course, that also means there's a lot more competition in the space and design space, who are, obviously going to be making other games which are competing products, but in a lot of ways they're not too, just because of the nature of what board games are.
This episode was recorded using Riverside. Riverside is an incredible video recording and live streaming tool for video podcasters and video creators. With the ability to record videos up to 4K resolution, all participants have access to active local backups, which make poor internet connections and lagging audio a thing of the past. If you're ready to upgrade the audio and video quality of your show, please be sure to check out the link in the description to experience Riverside for yourself. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I always say competition is a good thing because that means that your idea is validated. That means that there's a market for it, and other people popping up is just proof of that. When it comes to you, I think you did a launch over the pandemic. Is that right? You did a launch. I think it was 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did, at the end of 2020, basically coming off of the selling out of our first campaign. We decided to jump into another one, and I think, in retrospect, it was maybe too fast of a turnaround to do that, especially with the unknowns of the pandemic, which is why we've struggled to actually like get our products made at this point. And but it was the right choice to stay in the industry. We knew that we wanted to do something else, and so I'm glad that we just kept the ball rolling. It was like Rap Gods is one thing, but there's a lot more stories that we want to tell about, our lives and what we do.
Yeah. But I think it was also smart because I think I read somewhere that like puzzles was like the number one thing that people bought to play with their family or to do with their family. So, and then of course, like the Sony, was it the PS5? That's also like,
Oh,
a gaming
yeah.
system that people are familiar with, but in the vein of games, like they sold out so quickly. And it was like you would think that people who are struggling for money, who have potentially been laid off, are not going to splurge on, a $400 or $500 gaming system, but they did. So I think the pandemic, in a lot of ways, was the right time for games because they gave people a sense of community. They gave people a sense of peace. They gave people an outlet. They gave people a way to connect people safely and spend time, more meaningful time with the people around them now that they were probably at home. They probably had more family
Hmm.
time than ever, more community time than ever. And so I think that element is something that I hope really stays, which is like this importance on like having meaningful connections and just like the board game being a way to foster that, right? Just like how people use coffee or
Yeah,
people use anything else. I want it to be, you know, as synonymous with breathing as that. So,
it's that's 100% real. I think not only just a connection, but I think one of the other key pieces that I came into the industry kind of thinking about was just the culture of play and increasing, especially adults, professional adults, especially in the Black community. Like, there's absolutely a necessity to just play, whatever it is, games, dance. And we see in board game space, like, we can bring families together around this, like, and just play and have fun together, friends, couples. I think Hoop Gods is going to be a great couples game. You know, it's just like, just have an experience and try to enjoy it, and just go for it. And I just want more of that, especially for Black folks, because we work hard.
yeah.
We work real hard, and so I think the play is really important too.
Yes, yes. Making time for rest, making time for fun, making time for joy. I love it. I love all of it. So let's talk a little bit more about some of your other design freelancing work, right? Because you didn't just start with like, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to design a tabletop game. So what was your journey into just starting design as it was? Because you've been designing for a long time. So you've seen the industry grow and progress and what it means to be a designer, to be a designer evolve over time. Because now it's not just, I think at one point, being a designer was like creating graphics online and things like that. But
Hmm.
now it's kind of progressing to, are you a motion designer? Are you an illustrator? Are you an animator? Are you a web designer? You know, what other niches within that? I'm sure there are more. But like,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So like, how is that, you know, like kind of progression as a designer, as a career in general been like for you?
Oh man, I mean, that's a huge question, because I've spent time in so many different spaces. Like, my dad was a photographer and I grew up with that in my household, and that really, like, during college and after college, was the way that I supported myself. So I did photography and I did a computer science degree. So that also kind of put me in the web design space. And so I did that for a while too. So I really, and that eventually, of course, morphed into more graphic design. And so I got a good understanding of what I guess the design process was like, for me in just creating things. And that helped a lot, because when I finally got into board games, it was like, okay, I kind of understand how to sort of understand my vision and then move forward on that, and actually try to execute on that. So board games was, I think, the most engaging for me because of the social component and because of the physical component. Like, I initially wanted to be a video game designer, and but the process of that, just spending so much time in the code and the graphics, didn't resonate with me as much. But when I started doing board game design, I think that was the piece that was the most surprising. Is just like how enjoyable it was to foster those social interactions at the table and create that and craft that, and make interesting choices for people, because that's really what game design is time after time just providing interesting choices. um, and it just, I don't know, I think the in the physicality of it, just being there in person with people, really 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 just made me get attached to it. And I think all of that is still there. The challenges that have sort of come out of, the industry changing quite a bit now, with the pandemic. A lot of the design process actually went digital. So there's a lot of digital design tools out there where you can create prototypes and everything kind of on the fly, inside a piece of software, which is hugely beneficial to the industry as a whole. But also, the more I started doing that, the less enjoyable it was to have the process take place, the playtesting process take place. So, we're expanding, it's improving. There's a lot more board game publishing companies out there, which does mean more opportunities to potentially get your ideas in the hands of a publisher if you don't want to publish yourself, which is really cool. There's actually more crowdfunding avenues now. Backer Kit, which used to be a company that only really focused on marketing and pledge management, they now have their own crowdfunding tool. There's now GameFound, which is a new one, focused specifically on tabletop games. So again, finding those niches and figuring out what products are available is important. So there's been a lot of change. So the relationship with designers and publishers, I think, is changing and evolving in terms of just like how we get paid. And I think there's still a lot of growing pains in the industry going on too, because of, it's still fairly new in terms of that relationship between designer and publisher, or writer. A lot of games just require pure writing. I'm working on a couple games right now that are more about the narrative side of things than the gameplay side of things. And that's another piece that's evolving, the types of games that we're getting. So yeah, one of the games that I'm working on, called The Dark Quarter, is a hybrid game. It has an app and it has a physical board game piece to it. So there's stuff like that going on too. So plenty of opportunities and just variety. So it feels to me more to be the case now, where if you can imagine it, there's probably a good way to build it and design it that isn't going to be super inaccessible just based on the technology we have. There's a lot out there now, so
Yeah.
this should be good.
Yeah, you have just opened my mind because first of all, I didn't know there were publishers for games. So like my mind is a
Mhm.
little bit blown. So that's also an interesting aspect because now you're essentially adding a middleman, right? It's like the difference between
Yes.
self-publishing a book and then going through a publishing house to, have them facilitate a lot of the distribution and things like that for your book. So that's really interesting and intriguing and good to know. But also good again for people who maybe, let's say, have a good idea, but maybe not a good sounding board for said idea, and they have the capital to say, like, yeah, I would like to partner with a publisher on this, and work with these different crowdfunding sources, which again, like half the things you mentioned, I've never heard of. When you were saying crowdfunding, I was thinking like Indiegogo, Kickstart, like all the things
Hmm.
people would typically know or think of, which Indiegogo, to its credit, does kind of kick back and say, here are some other projects you may be interested in backing, or Kickstarter, same thing. Here are some other things you may be interested in backing. But if you're doing a tabletop game specifically, then it makes sense to be in a space where you could be recommended to other people who are already probably interested in investing in a tabletop game. So like having these like industry specific crowdfunding websites is like super, I think, key and could be like the game changer. I think sometimes it's not necessarily always like the method, is the distribution, right? So it's not that you don't have a good
Hmm.
idea, but maybe you just didn't distribute it in the right channel, right? So like that's social media, that's like photography, that's films, that's design, that's anything. Um, and that's always just like such a game that you play, but like that you get
Hmm.
better at as you get deeper into an industry, right? Um, so going back to like the different types of designers, like a big difference between like, let's say, UX UI design and graphic design is like the time between start and finish of a product, and then also that different time between like once that product is brought to market, like the reactions that you get from people, right? And it sounds like being a tabletop designer is kind of a mix of that, right? Because it may take you a minute to get from product idea to like get a prototype working. But then once you get it in the hands of people, the feedback is like instant, right? So you get kind of,
Hmm.
yeah, so you get like the best of both. It's like a hurry up and wait game, right? So it's like, hurry up, get this idea, get it out there, but then you get that immediate, like feedback. So
Yeah.
you can tweak, but then it might take a minute for those tweaks to show up in a revised copy and like all these other things.
There's a lot of tips and tricks to that. The iteration through board game design is one of the key things that I think kind of can scare people away because, yeah, in the ideal scenario that you're kind of describing, like you can do that quickly. So I give you one example of a trick that we use in developing card games all the time. So um, I've seen new designers basically, get a bunch of blank cards and just scribble all over them, but that doesn't work well for iteration. So the method that a lot of pro designers use is to use card sleeves, and so you just put random cards inside card sleeves, and you can literally just write on a sticky note what the card is going to be for the game, and just put it on the card and stick it in the sleeve. And when you want to change cards, you're just swapping out sticky notes. So it's a really quick way to iterate through things. And so you learn tips and tricks for, just getting through that process quickly, and understanding that also, you can test one part of the game without really needing to play another part of the game. So you can kind of isolate, okay, what am I testing here? Let's test that. And you can sort of do it separately from other pieces of the game. Um, you do it a few times, you start to kind of get into a rhythm of the testing and making changes process, which really, really actually gets tricky when you're developing 6 to 8 games at once, and just trying to manage that and keep track of what you did in each.
Yeah, no, yeah. It sounds like you've got a lot of projects, so we salute you. Well, that's
Yeah,
great though. That's great.
unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. It's like it's fun when it's an idea. It's overwhelming when you have like 10 ideas to manage, but you're just like excited about all of them when you want to see them come to fruition. So you stick with
Exactly.
it. Oh man. Well, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. I know that Colorway Game Labs has a whole lot in store for us in the future. For those listening and watching, if you haven't checked out Rap Gods or the future product Tube Gods, be sure to do that. And thank you so much, Omari, for being here with me.
Yeah, this was fabulous. Thanks for inviting me.